Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Streamable Horror. And today we're going to be looking at A Quiet Place, which right now is available on Amazon Prime. So let's get on with the video. The movie's about a group of survivors who survived an apocalypse where there's a group of monsters that if you make any sound they will come and kill you immediately. They are like almost the only survivors left in the world, and they're trying to find a way to defeat the monsters throughout the entire movie. I think the plot of this film was actually pretty original at the time, even though it kind of got copied by stuff like Bird Box, which I don't know which one technically came first, but I feel like Bird Box, the book, did. But I think it did a little bit better than Bird Box's idea, because it's really hard not to make a sound. So that is why I think the plot of this film is actually kind of good for what it's trying to go for. And let's get on with the violence and gore. The violence and the gore in this film is not too bad at all throughout the entire film. That is mainly because of the fact that this movie is PG-13. And PG-13 can turn off a bunch of horror fans, mainly due to the fact that that means it's a lot more tame than something like an R-rated horror film. So I'm going to say this, the violence in this film is not too bad for a PG-13 movie. Violence in this film is actually a lot for PG-13 movies, because most PG-13 movies, they cut a lot out. But this one, they didn't probably cut that much out, because it probably was made with PG-13 in mind. But sometimes it can be a little too tame for some people, and it's not too bad. It's not going to be as much as something like Grave Encounters or Autopsy of Jane Doe, but also not so little as something like Creep, where there's not really any gore at all throughout the entire film. This film still has quite a bit of gore in it, but just not as much as something like those R-rated, really hard horror films. This one's just more of a normal PG-13 horror, but not too much for the mainstream audiences to take. And that is why I say the violence and the gore in the film is not too bad, actually. And that is why we are now going to go on to the effectiveness and the scares. The scares in this film are actually not too bad. There's quite a few jump scares throughout the entire film, because it is a PG-13 horror film, so they're not going to do as much when it comes to psychological horror. But it's more of just a more jump scare fest type movie, and you should be expecting that mainly because the entire film is focused on sound. So that it makes it super easy for a jump scare to pop up, since jump scares rely on quietness, and about 90% of the movie has no dialogue in it. So expect a lot of jump scares throughout the entire feature film, and the jump scares can be sometimes effective and sometimes not. So the jump scares can be kind of annoying throughout the entire film, especially if you're just one of those people that can't stand jump scares at all. But besides that, the scares are not too awful, but they're not too great either. So that's why we're now going to go on to my final thoughts and my final recommendation. For my final thoughts and recommendation, I'm going to say that I do recommend this movie. And that is not very surprising, since this film was actually loved by a lot of people. This is probably one of the most mainstream horror films I've ever covered on this show, and I probably ever will, because basically everybody and their grandma saw this movie, and that just shows how popular it was. And it's so popular now that there's actually a sequel coming out actually this year, but very late this year. But that just shows how popular it is, and it's got a pretty star cast, so you know you're gonna get a lot of people watching it. So that is why I give a final recommendation of yes, do watch it, but also maybe if you're a hardcore horror fan, like really hardcore, do not watch this film. This is more of a mainstream horror film, and not really one for the not mainstream, because it's more of just a mainstream horror film that would come out every summer. So that's what you should expect, and this is Streamable Horror, and I'm out.
Like and subscribe for more amazing content.